Have you ever boarded a plane, paid for your seat, only to be told in front of everyone that you didn't belong there? Imagine being a black CEO, days away from signing a $3.5 billion deal, and hearing a flight attendant sneer economy only for you. In that instant, the humiliation isn't just personal, it's public, cutting into your dignity, your identity, your very place in the world. What would you do? Would you erupt in anger and risk losing everything, or would you stay silent, swallowing the pain? Now ask yourself this: if it were you, sitting in that seat, carrying the weight of your career, your community, your family's history, what choice would you make? This isn't just one man's story. It's a test of courage, of accountability, of whether institutions can truly change when they're forced to confront the truth. Stay with us, because what began as an insult 35,000 feet in the air turned into a movement that reshaped an entire industry. If this story touches you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And let's begin. The cabin smelled faintly of fresh leather and brewed coffee. The soft hum of the aircraft mixed with the quiet rustle of newspapers and the occasional clink of glasses as the flight attendants prepared for takeoff. It was supposed to be just another long-haul journey, the kind where first-class passengers tucked themselves under blankets, opened laptops, or ordered champagne before drifting into the haze of travel. But on Flight 827, something happened that shattered the polished calm. Jordan Ellis, impeccably dressed in a Navy suit, stepped into the aisle and reached for his seat. 2A. It was a corner seat by the window, the kind reserved for frequent flyers who valued both privacy and comfort. His boarding pass, printed in bold, carried one clear word. First, before he could sit, a sharp voice stopped him. "Sir, this section is reserved for first-class passengers," the flight attendant said, her tone clipped and authoritative. She looked him up and down, lips pressed into a tight line. "Economy is in the back." The words hung in the air like smoke. Passengers who were tucking bags into overhead bins froze mid-motion. A man across the aisle lowered his newspaper, eyes narrowing with curiosity. A woman paused in adjusting her seatbelt, sensing tension where none should exist. Jordan blinked once. His expression did not harden, nor did his voice rise. Instead, he held out his boarding pass, steady and deliberate. "Seat 2A, he said quietly. The attendant's frown deepened as she leaned in, scanning the ticket. The color drained from her face when she realized her mistake, or rather, her assumption. Jordan Ellis wasn't some lost economy passenger. He wasn't trying to sneak into first class. He was exactly where he belonged. The silence in the cabin grew heavier, almost suffocating. No one spoke, but everyone felt the weight of what had just occurred. Jordan lowered himself into his seat without another word. His movements were calm, deliberate, but his silence echoed louder than any outburst could have. He adjusted his cufflinks, slid his carry-on beneath the seat, and opened his leather notebook, as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. Across the cabin, a middle-aged businessman in 3B shifted uncomfortably. He had heard the words clearly. Economy is in the back. It wasn't just the mistake. It was the way she had said it, with the certainty of someone who believed she was right, who believed her perception of Jordan mattered more than the truth printed on his boarding pass. The businessman glanced at Jordan, searching for a reaction. There was none, at least none, visible. Jordan's face was composed, his pen already scratching across the page in front of him. But inside, behind the stillness, something stirred. Jordan Ellis was not just another passenger. He was the CEO of Ellis Technologies, one of the fastest-growing firms in the American tech sector. He had built the company from scratch, navigating obstacles that few in his position could fully understand. And he was on this flight for a reason far greater than personal travel. In less than 24 hours, Jordan was scheduled to sign a $3.5 billion contract with Atlantic Sky Airways. The deal, codenamed Project Horizon, was designed to transform the airline's operations, introducing predictive AI systems to improve efficiency, scheduling, and customer service. For Atlantic Sky, the deal was historic. For Jordan, it was another milestone in a career defined by quiet resilience. And now, before the contract was even signed, he had been told that his place was in the back. The irony wasn't lost on him. As the flight attendant moved down the aisle, pretending to busy herself with pre-flight checks, a man in 1C, later identified as Daniel Price, a marketing executive, caught Jordan's eye. He didn't speak, but his apologetic glance said, "Enough, I saw it. I know what happened." Jordan gave the faintest nod in return. He wasn't angry at the passengers. He wasn't even outwardly angry at the flight attendant. What consumed him was something deeper, quieter, but infinitely more powerful. At 35,000 feet, surrounded by strangers and polished leather, Jordan Ellis had been reduced not by fact, but by prejudice. He closed his notebook, rested his hands on the table, and exhaled slowly. Sometimes silence is sharper than confrontation. Sometimes it says, "I am not surprised." This has happened before, and it will happen again unless something changes. For now, Jordan chose silence, but it would not last forever. Jordan Ellis leaned back against the leather headrest, the cabin still buzzing with whispers that tried to mask themselves as polite silence. To the other passengers, he might have looked like a man unbothered, scribbling a few notes, adjusting his watch, staring briefly out the oval window at the tarmac below. But Jordan knew how to wear composure like a finely tailored suit. It hadn't always been that way. Years earlier, long before the title of CEO, long before Forbes magazine profiles and keynote speeches, he had been a boy running barefoot on the cracked sidewalks of Charleston, South Carolina. His mother, Gloria, worked double shifts at the hospital laundry. His father, Harold, drove a city bus through neighborhoods where passengers rarely looked the driver in the eye. Jordan grew up listening to his father's quiet mantra each night at the dinner table. Dignity doesn't come from what they give you. It comes from how you carry yourself. That phrase was carved deep into Jordan's bones. He had carried it through every classroom where teachers assumed his answers were guesses, through every boardroom where investors mistook him for an assistant, and through every airport lounge where attendants asked if he knew he was in the right place. On the flight tonight, when Claire Dawson's words landed like stones, "Economy is in the back," the sting was familiar. Painful, yes. Humiliating, absolutely. But not new. Jordan pressed his thumb against the ridge of his pen and thought back to the long path that had led him here. At 16, he had spent summer nights stocking shelves in a grocery store, saving every dollar to buy a used computer. He taught himself to code on that clunky machine, sometimes falling asleep at the keyboard, waking to the buzz of cicadas outside his window. While other kids saved for cars, Jordan saved for software manuals. In college, he often sat in classrooms where he was the only black student, the lone figure who carried not just his backpack, but the invisible weight of representing an entire race. Professors praised his work, but sometimes with that faint tone of surprise, as if excellence from him was an exception, not an expectation. He endured, but more than that, he excelled. After graduation, when he walked into his first corporate job at a Fortune 500 firm, a senior executive mistook him for the valet outside the office building. Jordan smiled, handed the man his ticket stub, and then walked into the boardroom 15 minutes later to present financial models that left the same executive speechless. Moments like those weren't rare. They were woven into the fabric of his life. Each time, Jordan had a choice: fight the insult in the moment, or carry it quietly and use it as fuel. more often than not, he chose the latter. And so, Ellis Technologies was born not from rage, but from relentless determination. Jordan built it from a cramped apartment with 2 second-hand laptops and a vision. Within a decade, it became a powerhouse in predictive analytics and artificial intelligence. Major corporations came knocking, not because they wanted to do a favor, but because his system saved them millions of dollars. Respect didn't arrive as a gift. It was wrestled, line by line of code, meeting by meeting, from a world reluctant to grant it. Tonight's trip wasn't about nostalgia. It was business, the kind that could redefine the future of an entire airline. Project Horizon wasn't just another contract. At $3.5 billion, it was set to integrate Ellis Technologies' advanced predictive systems into Atlantic Sky Airways' entire global operation. Planes would be scheduled more efficiently, crews deployed smarter, maintenance predicted before failures occurred. But beneath the spreadsheets and algorithms lay something deeper. Jordan had insisted the project also include human equity metrics tools to ensure passengers received equal treatment, regardless of race, gender, or status. That clause had sparked weeks of tense negotiation. Some executives at Atlantic Sky considered it unnecessary, a distraction from core operations. Jordan didn't flinch. For him, technology and humanity were 2 wings of the same plane. Without both, no system could truly fly. And now, here he was, on one of Atlantic Sky's very flights, enduring the very prejudice his system was designed to address. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. Jordan looked around the cabin. Passengers avoided his gaze, pretending to be absorbed in their phones or the glossy magazines tucked into seat pockets. Only Daniel Price, the marketing executive in 1C, still glanced his way occasionally, eyes heavy with unspoken recognition. Jordan wondered if Daniel knew who he was. Perhaps not. Perhaps to Daniel, he was just another passenger, a stranger with a ticket. That thought almost comforted him. Anonymity had a strange power. It let him see the raw truth of how people treated one another without the filter of titles or influence. He sipped water from the glass in front of him. His hands were steady, but inside, his thoughts turned restless. What was the right response? Should he have called Claire Dawson out immediately, shamed her in front of the cabin, demanded an apology? He could have. Many would have. Part of him ached, too. His silence might have looked like weakness, but Jordan believed silence could sometimes plant seeds that words could never reach. Still, the question gnawed. Had he done enough by saying nothing? Jordan pulled the leather-bound notebook closer. On the first page, he wrote a single sentence. Sometimes the most expensive ticket isn't the one you pay for. It's the one you lose. The hum of the aircraft deepened as the plane pushed down the runway, engines roaring like distant thunder. Passengers braced themselves, some with excitement, others with routine resignation. As the aircraft lifted into the night sky, Jordan's gaze stayed fixed on the words he had written. Because he knew this wasn't just about a boarding pass or even a single insult, it was about something far larger. Something that reached into the heart of who we decide belongs and who we decide does not. And tomorrow, when he walked into Atlantic Sky's headquarters to finalize Project Horizon, the weight of tonight's humiliation would not be forgotten. It would follow him like a shadow, quiet but undeniable, pressing against every decision he would make. He closed the notebook, folded his hands, and whispered a thought he had carried from childhood. Dignity doesn't come from what they give you. It comes from how you carry yourself. At 35,000 feet, Jordan Ellis carried himself with silence, but beneath that silence was a storm. The city lights below faded into pinpricks of gold as Flight 827 climbed higher, leaving Charleston's coastline behind. Jordan Ellis rested his head against the window, the cool glass grounding him in the swirl of thoughts rushing through his mind. Tomorrow's meeting at Atlantic Sky's headquarters in Dallas wasn't just another item on his calendar. It was the culmination of nearly a year's negotiation, countless drafts, and late-night calls with lawyers and engineers. On paper, it was a $3.5 billion contract, but in reality, it was something more fragile, more human. Project Horizon. The deal had been Jordan's idea from the beginning. Atlantic Sky Airways, one of the largest carriers in the country, had approached Ellis Technologies for help modernizing their scheduling system. Their delays, cancellations, and customer complaints were bleeding money. What they wanted was efficiency. What Jordan proposed was transformation. Instead of just optimizing routes and crew schedules, Ellis Technologies AI would analyze human interactions, tracking not just whether a flight was on time, but whether service was equitable. Were certain passengers offered upgrades more often than others? Did attendants unconsciously spend more time with one demographic than another? Did customer complaints vary based on who was speaking? These were questions airlines had rarely asked, let alone answered. Jordan insisted that Atlantic Sky couldn't move into the future without facing them. That insistence had cost him weeks of tense boardroom debates. One senior executive had leaned back in his chair, smirking. "We're paying for better planes in the air, not for sociology experiments," he said. Another had chimed in. "Passengers don't want philosophy. Mr. Ellis, they want their flights on time." Jordan had listened, calm as ever. Then he placed two charts side by side. One showed projected fuel savings from his system. The other showed potential revenue loss from lawsuits and PR crises tied to discriminatory service. "You can save millions," Jordan said, "but you'll lose billions if you ignore this." The room had gone quiet. By the end of that meeting, Atlantic Sky agreed reluctantly to keep the equity metrics in the contract. Now, on this flight, Jordan felt the bitter edge of irony. Before ink touched paper, before the deal was finalized, Atlantic Sky's own employee had handed him the perfect case study of why Project Horizon mattered. He closed his eyes briefly, remembering the expression on Claire Dawson's face when she had realized her mistake. Shock, yes. But beneath it, something else, a stubbornness, as if she resented that the boarding pass contradicted her assumption. It wasn't an innocent slip. It was certainty shattered by fact. Jordan exhaled slowly. He knew tomorrow's meeting would be about numbers, clauses, and signatures. But for him, it would also be about this moment, here in seat 2A, where dignity was questioned in front of dozens of strangers. He thought about his team, the engineers and analysts back in Atlanta who had spent months refining algorithms, coding late into the night, believing in his vision. They didn't just want to build technology, they wanted to build trust. Jordan had promised them this contract wasn't just about profit, it was about proof that technology could push society toward fairness. He rubbed his temples, fatigue creeping in. The deal was big, but so were the stakes. Atlantic Sky's CEO, Victoria Lane, was known for her tough negotiating style. Sharp, ambitious, with a reputation for turning setbacks into PR triumphs. She wasn't the type to cave easily. Jordan respected her, but he also knew she had a board breathing down her neck, watching every dollar. Would she see tonight's humiliation as an inconvenience to Barry, or as the warning sign it truly was? Jordan's thoughts drifted back to his childhood again. His father's bus route had wound through neighborhoods where some passengers dropped change into the fare box without even glancing up, as if the driver didn't exist. Jordan used to ride along sometimes, sitting behind his father, watching. Harold Ellis never raised his voice, never demanded attention. But each night he came home and said, "Respect is not about their eyes meeting yours. It's about you never looking away from yourself." Jordan carried that into every boardroom, every contract, and now into this flight. The aircraft leveled off. the seatbelt sign dimming. Flight attendants moved down the aisles with practiced grace, offering drinks and menus. When Claire reached Jordan's row, her smile was tight, professional, but her hands trembled slightly as she set down his glass. "Would you care for anything else, sir?" she asked. Voice softer now. Jordan met her eyes for the first time since boarding. "No, thank you," he said evenly. Then he looked back at his notebook, ending the exchange. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Across the aisle, Daniel Price shifted again, clearly unsettled. He had recognized Jordan by now not as a stranger, but as the man whose signature could make or break the very contract his company was chasing. Daniel felt a knot forming in his stomach. He knew what tomorrow meant for Atlantic Sky. He also knew what tonight might cost. As the cabin settled into the rhythm of flight, Jordan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, numbers would be debated. But tonight, the truth was already written in silence. For Jordan Ellis, the contract in the clouds wasn't just about business. It was about whether an airline, and perhaps a nation, was ready to see beyond the assumptions that kept people in invisible cages. He closed his eyes, whispering a quiet prayer his mother used to say, "Lord, give me strength to stand tall when others try to make me small." The engines roared steady, the night sky endless. Jordan's silence carried him forward, but beneath it, resolve gathered like a storm waiting for its moment to break. The hum of the engines had become a steady backdrop, almost hypnotic. Passengers settled into their routines, headphones on, laptops open, eyes closed. For most, it was just another flight. For Jordan Ellis, it was a crucible. He stared at the neat lines of his notes, though he wasn't reading them anymore. His mind circled back to the boarding gate like a hawk, unable to leave its prey. The words "economy" only had followed him into the cabin, echoing louder than the engines outside. Claire Dawson moved down the aisle with a tray of dinner service, her smile rehearsed, her motions efficient. Yet every time she glanced toward seat 2A, something flickered in her expression. Regret, perhaps, or stubborn pride. She was caught between the weight of her mistake and the instinct to bury it under professionalism. Daniel Price, in 2C, hadn't touched his meal. He kept fidgeting with the napkin, folding and unfolding it, his chest tight with unease. He knew he couldn't stay silent much longer. His conscience gnawed at him. Halfway through the meal service, turbulence rattled the plane. Glasses trembled, silverware clinked. Claire steadied herself against the seat back and bent toward Jordan. "Everything all right, sir?" she asked, her voice tight. Jordan lifted his eyes slowly, calmly. "I've been through worse storms," he replied. The answer wasn't about the plane. Claire knew it. For a moment, her practiced composure cracked. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it, straightened, and moved on. Daniel swallowed hard. He couldn't take the silence anymore. Leaning slightly toward Jordan, he lowered his voice. "Mr. Ellis, I just want to say I'm sorry for what happened back there. I saw it, and I should have spoken up sooner." Jordan studied him, surprised at the sudden confession. His expression softened slightly. It's easier to stay quiet, harder to step forward. Daniel nodded, shame heating his face. "Still, silence makes me part of the problem. I know that. And tomorrow, in Dallas, you'll be in that boardroom with people like me, people who will want to act like tonight didn't happen." Jordan's gaze sharpened. "And what will you do tomorrow?" The question landed heavy. Daniel didn't answer immediately. But in that moment, he knew his role in this story wasn't just as a passenger. It was as a witness and maybe as an ally. Hours later, the cabin lights dimmed, casting the space into a muted glow. Most passengers drifted into sleep. Jordan remained awake, replaying the moment at the gate in his mind. His mother's voice returned to him, a memory stitched into his bones. They'll try to tell you where you belong. Jordan, don't let them. You know your place, and it's wherever you stand with dignity. For years, he had lived by those words, but tonight they took on new weight. As the flight crossed into Texas airspace, the captain's voice broke the quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing in Dallas shortly. Please fasten your seat belts. The descent was smooth, but inside Jordan, turbulence swelled. Tomorrow wasn't just about signing a contract. It was about whether Atlantic Sky would face the truth of its culture or bury it under glossy press releases. The wheels touched down with a soft thud. Passengers applauded half-heartedly. Claire stood at the front, thanking everyone as they disembarked. When Jordan approached, she straightened, words catching in her throat. "Mr. Ellis," she began, her voice strained. I didn't mean." Jordan stopped her with a steady look. His tone was calm but unyielding. Meaning doesn't erase impact. He walked past her, his stride even, his presence commanding without force. Claire's shoulders sagged. For the first time in years of flying, she felt small in her own uniform. Outside, the Dallas night was warm, the terminal bustling with travelers rushing toward taxis and shuttles. Jordan's assistant, Maya Brooks, was waiting with her tablet in hand. "You all right?" she asked, noticing the shadow in his eyes. Jordan gave a small nod. "We'll talk later. Right now, we prepare for tomorrow." Maya fell into step beside him, sensing the weight of the unspoken. As they drove to the hotel, neon lights flickered against the car windows. Jordan leaned back, his reflection staring at him from the glass. Tonight had exposed something raw. Tomorrow would decide whether it mattered. The crossroads had arrived 30,000 feet above ground, but its consequences would play out in boardrooms and headlines. And Jordan Ellis was ready to walk straight into the storm. The morning sun cut sharp angles across downtown Dallas, bouncing off towers of glass and steel. Jordan Ellis stood before the hotel mirror, adjusting his tie with deliberate care. His reflection stared back, calm, steady, unshaken. Yet inside, he carried the weight of last night. At breakfast, Maya Brooks had noticed his silence. She didn't press, but as she slid a stack of briefing papers across the table, she said softly, "You know, people expect numbers today, but what they'll remember is the story you tell." Jordan gave a faint smile. The story told itself before we even landed. By the time they reached Atlantic Sky's headquarters, the air was heavy with Texas heat. The building rose like a fortress, sleek, imposing, humming with the efficiency of thousands of employees moving in precise rhythm. Jordan paused at the entrance, a quiet ritual he had learned from his father. Take a breath. Plant your feet. Remember who you are before walking into any room where people might try to tell you otherwise. Maya leaned toward him. "They'll be tough today. Victoria especially. She doesn't like surprises." Jordan nodded. "Neither do I." Inside, the boardroom stretched wide, lined with high-backed leather chairs and a wall of glass overlooking the skyline. At the far end sat Victoria Lane, Atlantic Sky's CEO. Her reputation had preceded her sharp eyes, sharper instincts, a strategist who could turn crises into headlines that read like victories. She rose as Jordan entered. "Mr. Ellis, welcome to Dallas. I trust your flight was comfortable." The words carried a flicker of irony that only Jordan caught. He met her gaze evenly. Comfortable enough. Executives filled the seats. Finance, operations, marketing. Daniel Price sat near the middle, his expression tight. He hadn't slept much, and his conscience felt heavier under the fluorescent lights. He hadn't told anyone what he had witnessed on Flight 827, but he knew the silence couldn't hold forever. Victoria gestured to the head of the table. "Shall we begin?" The meeting unfolded with practiced precision. Charts appeared on screens. Financial projections were recited. Engineers spoke of system integrations, algorithms, and operational savings. Jordan listened, interjecting with clarity when questions arose. His presence was steady, his voice calm but firm. Then came the turning point. Victoria folded her hands, her tone shifting. "Mr. Ellis, before we finalize anything, there's an incident we need to discuss." The room went still. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Claire Dawson's words, sharp and careless, seemed to echo across the table. Jordan leaned back slightly, giving nothing away. "Go on." Victoria's eyes narrowed. Assessing him. "It's come to my attention there was some tension during your flight here." "A misunderstanding? Perhaps." Jordan allowed a pause, letting the silence press on every corner of the room. "Finally," he said, "it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was clarity. Your flight attendant looked at me and decided I didn't belong in the seat I had paid for. She told me, in front of everyone. Economy only." Murmurs rustled among the board members. A few shifted uncomfortably, while others scribbled notes. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. "Mr. Ellis," she began carefully. "We are deeply sorry if you felt disrespected," Jordan cut in, his tone still calm, but edged with steel. "Respect isn't about feelings, it's about actions, and actions speak louder than apologies." The room froze. Jordan's voice carried not anger, but something heavier. Conviction. Daniel felt the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. He cleared his throat, surprising even himself. "He's right. I was there. I saw it happen exactly as he described, and we can't pretend it didn't." All eyes turned toward him. Victoria's brows lifted. "Mr. Price." Daniel's voice wavered at first, then steadied. "I didn't say anything last night. I should have, but silence doesn't erase what happened. If we're serious about this partnership, we have to face it. Because if someone like Jordan Ellis can be treated that way, what chance do ordinary passengers have?" The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward. Some executives looked uncomfortable, others looked impressed. Jordan inclined his head slightly, acknowledging Daniel's courage. Then he spoke again, his tone deliberate. "This contract isn't just about algorithms and fuel savings. It's about culture. Your systems can predict maintenance failures. But can they predict when bias will break trust with a customer? Can they prevent the next scandal before it costs you billions?" Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying him. For the first time, her controlled facade cracked just enough to show calculation giving way to something more personal. She understood the stakes. Jordan continued, voice steady. "Last night wasn't an inconvenience. It was a mirror. And what you choose to see in it will define the future of this company." The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Outside the glass wall, the Dallas skyline gleamed under the noon sun, but inside, the temperature had shifted. Victoria finally spoke, her voice low but clear. "Then we need to decide today whether we're signing a contract for efficiency or for transformation." Jordan didn't blink. "I came here for transformation. The choice is yours." The boardroom held its breath. Numbers could be debated, systems tested, terms negotiated, but the question hanging in the air was larger than any spreadsheet. Would Atlantic Sky choose to face its truth or bury it beneath polished reports? For Jordan Ellis, the answer would determine more than a contract. It would define whether his dignity and the dignity of countless unseen passengers would be safeguarded or sold short. And in that stillness, the storm broke not with thunder, but with the simple weight of truth finally spoken aloud. The silence in the boardroom stretched, thick enough to choke on. Every executive avoided each other's eyes, as though acknowledgement itself might carry blame. Only two figures seemed completely still: Jordan Ellis, seated with calm authority, and Victoria Lane, standing at the head of the table with her hands pressed flat against the polished oak. "Mr. Ellis," she said finally, her voice measured, "I won't pretend this isn't serious, but this company employs 65,000 people. One incident, however regrettable, doesn't define us." Jordan tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Incidents don't define you. Patterns do. And the question isn't whether this was isolated, it's whether you're willing to find out." A murmur rose around the table. Some executives nodded unconsciously, while others stiffened in their chairs. Victoria exhaled, pushing back against the current. "You're asking us to accept oversight that extends far beyond what most of our competitors would tolerate. Predictive equity metrics, service consistency tracking, intervention protocols. These are not minor adjustments. They could fundamentally alter how our crews operate. It will be disruptive." Jordan leaned forward, folding his hands. "Transformation is always disruptive. The only question is whether you disrupt yourselves or wait for the world to do it for you." The CFO, a gray-haired man named Alan Rivers, cleared his throat. "With respect, Mr. Ellis, Wall Street rewards efficiency, not philosophy. We're already under pressure from rising fuel costs. Adding cultural initiatives into this system may be overreach." Jordan didn't raise his voice, but the steadiness of his reply carried more force than volume. Respectfully, "Mr. Rivers, culture is not philosophy. It's currency, and you're already spending it every time a passenger feels like they don't belong on your aircraft, every time silence covers a wrong. The bill always comes due." Daniel Price shifted in his seat, the weight of complicity gnawing at him. He caught Victoria's eye and spoke before nerves could silence him. "I know what Mr. Ellis is saying is true. I watched it last night, and I've seen smaller versions of it before: a joke in the galley, a glance that lingers too long, a tone that shifts depending on who's being served. We've ignored it, but if we don't fix it now, one day it won't just be a passenger complaining. It'll be a headline, a scandal we can't spin." All eyes turned to him. Victoria's brows arched slightly, a flicker of surprise that her own executive had sided so openly with Jordan. Jordan gave a subtle nod in Daniel's direction before returning his attention to the table. "This is why Project Horizon matters. It doesn't just make your operations efficient, it makes them accountable. It doesn't just save you money, it protects your reputation and your humanity." The COO, a brisk woman named Ellen Park, leaned forward. "And what if the metrics show ugly truths? What if patterns we've ignored for years suddenly become visible? How do we manage the fallout?" Jordan's answer came without hesitation: by owning it, by addressing it, by proving to your customers that you're willing to face uncomfortable truths rather than bury them. That's how you build trust that lasts longer than a press cycle. For a moment, no one spoke. Outside, a jet roared across the Dallas sky, its shadow sweeping across the glass wall like a reminder of what was at stake. Finally, Victoria straightened. "Let's be clear. You're asking us to gamble our culture, our reputation, and billions of dollars on your vision." Jordan held her gaze. "No, I'm asking you to gamble nothing, because the risk isn't in change. The risk is in staying exactly as you are." The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. Victoria turned to her executives. "Give us the room," she said. One by one, they filed out, leaving only Victoria, Jordan, Daniel, and Maya. The door shut with a soft click, sealing the tension inside. Victoria walked slowly toward the window, her reflection overlapping with the skyline. "You know, Mr. Ellis, this airline has weathered bankruptcies, strikes, recessions. We've always found a way to survive." Jordan rose from his chair, his posture unyielding. Survival isn't the same as leadership. You can scrape by another decade, patching over the cracks. Or you can choose to set a standard others will follow. That's the difference between being remembered and being forgotten. For the first time, Victoria's voice softened, almost personal. "You remind me of my father. He used to say leadership meant carrying other people's mistakes on your back. Sometimes I wonder if the weight ever breaks us." Jordan's expression gentled, but his words remained steady. "It only breaks you if you carry it alone. That's why systems matter. They hold the weight with you. They make accountability collective, not just personal." A long silence followed. Victoria turned back toward him, her eyes sharper now, but less guarded. "You believe in this," she said quietly. "Not just the technology. The principle." Jordan nodded once. "Because I've lived the cost when principle is ignored." Victoria studied him, the truth of his conviction cutting through the corporate layers. Then she glanced at Daniel, who gave the faintest nod of support. Maya sat silent but steady, her presence a reminder of the team behind Jordan's vision. Finally, Victoria exhaled. "All right, let's draft the terms. But understand this, if we do this, it won't be halfway. It'll be across the company, from the front line to the boardroom." Jordan's lips curved into the faintest smile. "That's the only way it works." The boardroom, moments ago a battlefield, had shifted into something else, a forge. Out of tension, something new was taking shape. And though the contract wasn't yet signed, the path toward transformation had begun. The boardroom door opened again, and the executives filed back in. The air felt different now, less rigid, as if the storm had cracked something open. Victoria Lane remained standing at the head of the table, her shoulders squared, her voice crisp. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving forward with Project Horizon. Not as an experiment, not as a side program, but as a company-wide mandate. We'll build the accountability systems Mr. Ellis described, and we'll integrate them with every layer of our operations." The room buzzed with murmurs. Some executives exchanged wary glances. Others scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Alan Rivers, the CFO, frowned. With respect, "Victoria, do we even understand the financial implications? A rollout this size will cost millions beyond the contract. Training, compliance, audits." Victoria cut him off with a sharp hand. "Alan, the cost of inaction is higher. We've been here before. Remember 2015, the customer service meltdown. We spent $500 million recovering from a crisis that could have been prevented with foresight. This is foresight." Jordan sat calmly, hands folded, watching the push and pull. He knew this was only the beginning. Cultural transformation was never decided in one meeting. It was fought for in daily choices, in every corner of the organization. Ellen Park, the COO, leaned forward. "We'll need a phased implementation. Pilots, flight attendants, ground staff. If we overwhelm them, they'll resist." Jordan nodded. "Phased, but consistent. People need to see results quickly, or skepticism grows. That's why the first metrics should be visible within 3 months, not just to you, but to them. Transparency builds trust." Victoria gestured toward him. "Work with Ellen on the rollout schedule. Maya, you'll liaise with their team to ensure integration stays on track." Maya's pen moved swiftly across her notepad. Her eyes met Jordan's, briefly steady, confident. For a moment, there was a fragile sense of alignment, but fragile things can shatter quickly. Just as Victoria was outlining next steps, the conference room doors burst open. A young communications manager hurried in, pale-faced, clutching a phone. "Ms. Lane, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have a situation." The room stiffened. Victoria's voice was sharp. "What kind of situation?" The manager hesitated, then turned the phone screen toward her. A video was playing. Jordan didn't need to see it twice. It was the boarding gate from Flight 827. Claire Dawson's voice, clear as day, economy only. The camera caught his steady posture. The moment he corrected her, the visible discomfort of the surrounding passengers. The clip cut off just as he entered the jet bridge, but it was enough. Victoria's face hardened. How many views? Over 200,000 in the last hour. It's spreading fast. The hashtag economy only is trending on Twitter. A ripple of panic spread across the table. Executives began whispering urgently, some already pulling out their phones. Alan Rivers muttered, "This is a PR disaster." Jordan remained silent, his expression unreadable. But inside, he felt the twist of irony. The story they had all hoped to keep contained was now rushing into the open, too powerful to control. Victoria snapped back into command mode. "Shut it down! Reach out to the platform. Flag copyright." Jordan's voice cut through, calm but firm. "Don't. You'll only make it worse." All eyes swung toward him. "This isn't a problem to bury," he continued. "It's an opportunity to lead. People are watching now. They want to know not just what happened, but how you'll respond. You can't control the narrative by silencing it. You control it by showing what you'll do differently." Daniel Price spoke up, his voice steady this time. "He's right. If we try to cover it, it'll look like we care more about protecting ourselves than about passengers. We'll confirm every doubt they already have about us." Victoria's jaw tightened. She hated losing control of a story, but she also knew Jordan was right. Suppression would fuel the fire. Transparency was the only chance to redirect it. She turned slowly toward him. "What would you suggest, Mr. Ellis?" Jordan leaned forward, the weight of the moment clear in his measured words. "You have two choices. Issue a statement saying this was an isolated mistake, suspend the employee, and hope the storm passes. Or," he paused, letting the silence sharpen the moment, "or you tell the truth. Admit this wasn't about one employee. It was about a culture that needs to change. And you show the world that change begins now with this contract." The room buzzed with tension. Admitting systemic flaws was unthinkable for most corporations, but Jordan knew it was the only path forward. Victoria paced slowly, her heels clicking against the floor. Finally, she stopped. Facing the room, "We'll draft a statement. Full transparency. We'll name the problem, and we'll announce Project Horizon as the solution." Gasps echoed. Alan Rivers muttered, "That's suicide." But Ellen Park interrupted, surprising herself. "No, that's leadership." Jordan felt a flicker of respect for her, even in fear. She understood the stakes. Victoria's gaze settled back on him. Then, "Mr. Ellis, I hope you're ready. Because after today, this contract won't just be a deal between two companies. It will be a public promise. And if we fail, it won't be quiet." Jordan's reply was simple, steady. "I didn't come here for quiet." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't paralysis. It was resolve forming in the air, heavy and undeniable. Outside the boardroom, the hashtag grew louder, the video spreading faster. But inside, a blueprint was being written not just for a contract, but for a transformation the world would soon be watching. By dawn the next morning, the video had crossed 1 million views. News anchors dissected it in clipped tones. Talk radio buzzed with callers furious or defensive, and Twitter boiled with outrage. The hashtag #EconomyOnly had climbed into the top 5 nationwide. Clips replayed across every major network, Claire Dawson's voice cutting sharp. Jordan Ellis's calm correction, the murmur of witnesses. It wasn't just a viral moment, it was a lightning rod. At Atlantic Sky's Dallas headquarters, the crisis team gathered in a war room humming with ringing phones, glowing monitors, and the stale scent of overnight coffee. Executives looked haggard, their eyes ringed with fatigue. Victoria Lane entered briskly, her voice steady despite the storm. "Give me numbers." The communications director rattled them off. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox are all running the clip. 3 million views by noon, trending globally. Hashtags spawning off "Fly with Respect." Sky bias. Influencers are piling on. And civil rights groups are calling for formal investigations. Alan Rivers rubbed his temples. "Our stock dropped 6% overnight. If this keeps up, we'll bleed billions before the quarter ends." Ellen Park snapped back. "And if we cover it up, we'll bleed trust. That's harder to recover than stock price." Jordan Ellis sat quietly at the end of the table, Maya beside him. He hadn't been invited as a consultant for this meeting, but Victoria had insisted he stay. "If we're going to talk about solutions," she said, "we need the man who lived it in the room." The room fell into uneasy silence. Some executives bristled at his presence, others looked relieved. Jordan's calm was unnerving, not angry, not triumphant, just steady, as if he had prepared for this moment his whole life. Daniel Price, sitting 2 chairs down, finally spoke. "We can't spin this away. The public won't buy it. The only way forward is to own it and prove we're changing." Alan scoffed. "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one watching billions vanish from shareholder value." Jordan's voice cut through, level but piercing. "You're wrong, Alan. That's exactly what I've been saying. You don't lose billions because someone made a mistake. You lose billions because you refuse to learn from it. This isn't about a single employee. It's about whether Atlantic Sky believes dignity is optional." The room went still. Victoria exhaled, tapping her pen against the table. "We're drafting a statement. I'll deliver it myself. Live. We'll apologize, acknowledge systemic issues, and announce Project Horizon as our answer." The communications director hesitated. "That's risky. Admitting systemic bias could open us to lawsuits." Jordan turned toward him. "Not admitting it guarantees them." The director had no answer. Victoria glanced at Maya. "What's your team's readiness on Horizon?" Maya slid a folder across the table. "We can launch the first phase in 90 days. Pilot routes only, with visible metrics. Transparency dashboards for both staff and passengers. We'll need full access to training programs and HR systems." Ellen leaned in, nodding. "That's doable. And visible results in 3 months could shift the narrative." Alan still looked unconvinced, but even he knew the tide was turning. The video had forced their hand. Victoria stood, then it settled. "This afternoon, I go live. We tell the world what happened. We own it. And we commit to Horizon as the solution." The meeting adjourned, but tension lingered. Executives scattered, phones already to their ears, damage control in full swing. Jordan lingered by the window, watching the city sprawl beneath the morning haze. Maya touched his arm lightly. "You know this isn't over. It's just the beginning." Jordan nodded. "Good. Beginnings are where change happens." That afternoon, cameras lined the press hall. Journalists crowded shoulder to shoulder, flashes sparking like lightning. The air buzzed with anticipation. Victoria Lane stepped to the podium, her tailored suit immaculate, her expression grave but resolute. Behind her, The Atlantic Sky logo glowed. "Yesterday," she began, her voice firm. A video surfaced showing one of our flight attendants addressing a passenger in a way that was unacceptable. That passenger was Mr. Jordan Ellis, CEO of Ellis Technologies. But let me be clear, it should not matter who he was. Every passenger deserves dignity and respect. On Flight 827, we failed to provide it. Gasps and camera shutters filled the room. No corporate hedging, no denial, a straight admission. Victoria continued, "This is not about one employee. This is about a culture that must change. Today, we are committing to a transformation. We are partnering with Ellis Technologies to launch Project Horizon, a system that will ensure accountability, transparency, and equity in every passenger interaction. This will be disruptive, it will be uncomfortable, but it is necessary, and we begin now." Reporters shouted questions. Victoria answered some, sidestepped others. But the tone had shifted. The story was no longer just about a flight attendant's words. It was about a company's reckoning. Watching from the wings, Jordan felt a strange mix of pride and weight. Pride that truth had been spoken. Weight because he knew promises were easy under the spotlight. Living them out in the dark was the true test. Across the country, reactions poured in. Civil rights leaders cautiously praised Atlantic Sky's transparency. Social media buzzed with debate. Some applauded the honesty. Others accused the company of damage control dressed as virtue. Stock prices wavered but began to stabilize. And among Atlantic Sky's own employees, the message hit like a thunderclap. Some felt fear, afraid their every action would now be scrutinized. Others felt relief finally. The silent wrongs they had witnessed had been named. Flight attendants filled online forums with nervous chatter, some angry, some hopeful. In a break room at LaGuardia Airport, 2 junior attendants watched the press conference replay. One whispered. She actually said it, out loud. The other nodded slowly. Maybe things will finally change. For Jordan, that was the point. Not the headlines, not the hashtags, not even the contract itself, but the quiet shift in break rooms, in training sessions, in the hearts of people deciding whether silence or courage would guide them. The firestorm had begun, and from its heat, something new might yet be forged. 2 days after the press conference, the mood inside Atlantic Sky Airways felt like a storm cloud drifting through every terminal, every crew lounge, every office. Employees weren't sure whether to feel proud or afraid. Change had been announced, but no one yet knew what it meant for them. At LaGuardia, in the crew break room, conversations buzzed between sips of lukewarm coffee. "Did you watch the press conference?" one attendant asked. "Of course," another replied. "I watched it 3 times. Can you believe she admitted it? Systemic issues. I never thought I'd hear those words from a CEO." Some nodded, hopeful. Others crossed their arms. "Defensive. Feels like we're being thrown under the bus." One muttered, "One mistake, and now we're the villains." But beneath the defensiveness lay something else: recognition. Many had seen subtle moments on flights, a tone that shifted with a passenger's skin color. A joke whispered between crew members that wasn't funny. An upgrade offered more quickly to one traveler than another. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but everyone knew it existed. For some, the change felt overdue. For others, it felt like an indictment. Meanwhile, in a quiet office in Dallas, Claire Dawson sat across from an HR director, her uniform folded neatly on the desk between them. Her face was pale, her hands twisting a tissue to shreds. "I didn't mean it that way," she said, her voice breaking. "I wasn't thinking. I made a mistake." The director's tone was firm, but not cruel. "Claire, the video speaks for itself. and so do the witnesses. This isn't just about one passenger, it's about what that moment represents. Tears welled in her eyes. 30 years in the sky. I've given my life to this job, and now I'm being made an example. The director sighed. It's not about punishment, it's about accountability. There's a difference. You'll be placed on indefinite leave. Training will be required if you ever return. Claire buried her face in her hands. She had always prided herself on professionalism, on calm under pressure. But the truth was unavoidable. Her words had stripped dignity from another human being, and the world had seen it. As she left the office, the terminal's fluorescent lights seemed harsher, the chatter of travelers louder. For the first time in her long career, she felt like a stranger in the very place she had once belonged. Across town, Jordan Ellis sat in his hotel room, staring at the glow of his laptop screen. The news cycle churned on, his name threaded through headlines, interviews, opinion columns. He scrolled past them, his face calm, but his chest tight. The pressure wasn't just professional anymore, it was personal. His inbox overflowed with messages, some praising him as a hero, others accusing him of overreacting, of seeking attention, of playing a race card he never asked to hold. Maya knocked gently on the door and stepped in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You need to rest," she said softly. Jordan gave a tired smile. "Rest doesn't come easy when the whole country has an opinion about you." She set the cup down beside him. "You didn't ask for this spotlight, but maybe it found you because you could carry it." He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Carrying it is one thing, living with it is another. Every word I say now will be dissected, every silence questioned. And I can't help but wonder, will this change really last, or will it fade when the headlines move on?" Maya studied him, her eyes steady. Change doesn't live in headlines. It lives in people, in how they treat each other when no one is watching. And right now, you've given them a reason to look at themselves differently. That's not small. Jordan let the words sink in. She was right. Change wasn't measured in stock prices or trending hashtags. It was measured in the quiet, invisible choices people made each day. That evening, Daniel Price called. His voice carried both exhaustion and determination. "Jordan," he began, "I need to say thank you for not letting me stay silent. I've been thinking about that night on the plane, how I froze, how easy it was to let the moment slip by. I don't want to be that man anymore." Jordan's reply was gentle but firm. "Then don't. Speak up. Not for me. For the next person. For yourself." There was a pause on the line. Then Daniel said, "I will, starting tomorrow." Jordan closed his laptop after the call, the city lights of Dallas flickering beyond the window. Despite the exhaustion, he felt a small ember of hope stirring. 3 days later, Atlantic Sky hosted a town hall meeting for employees. Thousands tuned in virtually. Hundreds gathered in person. Victoria Lane stood on stage with Jordan at her side. "This is not about blame," Victoria told the crowd. "This is about responsibility. We are choosing to face uncomfortable truths because we believe this company and every person who flies with us deserves better." Jordan stepped forward. His voice was calm, deliberate. Accountability isn't punishment, it's protection. For passengers, yes, but also for you, the crews, the staff, the people who make this airline what it is. Because dignity isn't a gift we give, it's a right we honor. The hall was silent, then rippled with applause. Not thunderous, but steady, real. Some employees still crossed their arms, skeptical, but others straightened their backs, a flicker of pride in their eyes. The words had planted something. Seeds don't bloom overnight, but they had been sown. So, that night, Jordan sat alone on the hotel balcony, the Texas air warm around him. He thought of his father's words, of his mother's prayers, of the boy he once was, the boy who had been told in a dozen ways that his place was smaller than his dreams. Now he was here, carrying not just his own dignity, but the weight of others who couldn't sit at this table, who couldn't speak into microphones, who had been silenced by shame or fear. The responsibility was heavy, but it was his to carry, and he knew, as he watched the planes trace their lines of light across the night sky, that the journey had only just begun. By the end of the week, Jordan Ellis could hardly step into a lobby without seeing his own face on a television screen. News anchors debated him in polished voices, columnists dissected his every word, and strangers across the country argued about him at kitchen tables and bar counters. The video from Flight 827 had evolved beyond a viral moment. It had become a national conversation. On morning shows, pundits framed it as a question of race, of class, of corporate accountability. On late-night talk shows, comedians worked it into monologues, their punchlines uneasy in the laughter they drew. Civil rights leaders cited it in speeches. Politicians latched onto it, weaving it into their platforms like thread into fabric. The words economy only had become more than an insult. They were a symbol of exclusion, of prejudice, of invisible lines drawn in the air above the clouds. In Washington, a congresswoman from Georgia stood before cameras. This is not about one flight or one airline. This is about the daily indignities millions of Americans face, indignities that pile up, flight after flight, job after job, until they weigh heavier than any luggage. The soundbites spread fast, fueling calls for hearings on bias in the airline industry. Activists began organizing boycotts, petitions demanding federal oversight. For Atlantic Sky, the pressure mounted. Customer hotlines flooded with calls from canceling flights, others demanding to know what was being done. Bookings dipped. Rival airlines quietly studied the fallout, wary of their own skeletons. Victoria Lane convened her team daily, her voice sharp but resolute. We cannot back down now. The public is watching. If we retreat, we're finished. If we lead, we survive. Behind closed doors, not all executives agreed. Alan Rivers warned of financial ruin, painting charts with red arrows plunging downward. Ellen Park countered with projections showing long-term trust outweighing short-term loss. The debates were fierce, but Victoria held the line. Meanwhile, Jordan carried a different burden. Walking through airports became a gauntlet. Passengers approached him with gratitude, with tears, with stories of their own humiliations. A middle-aged man stopped him in Dallas. "I'm a veteran. I wore the uniform for 20 years, but I've been looked at the same way you were, like I didn't belong. Thank you for speaking up." At another terminal, a young woman whispered, "I've been a flight attendant for 5 years. I've seen things I regret staying quiet about. Please don't stop." Each story weighed on Jordan, not as praise, but as responsibility. He hadn't asked to become a symbol, but symbols weren't chosen by the people who bore them. They were thrust upon them like cloaks too heavy to shrug off. Maya noticed the toll. One evening, she found him staring out at the Dallas skyline, shoulders slumped. "You look like you're carrying the whole country," she said gently. Jordan's voice was low. "Maybe I am. At least, that's what it feels like." She stepped closer. "Then remember, you don't have to carry it alone. Change isn't just you. It's everyone who decides to stand up because you did." Her words gave him strength, but the fatigue remained. On social media, the divide deepened. For every message of support, there was one of hostility. Some accused him of overreacting, of seeking fame, of damaging an airline over a small mistake. Memes circulated, some cruel, some absurd. Daniel Price, scrolling through the noise late at night, felt a pit in his stomach. He had witnessed the truth, and he knew how far from small it was. He resolved to speak out more openly, drafting an op-ed about his silence that night and how complicity feeds injustice. He sent Jordan the draft first. Jordan read it carefully, then nodded. "Tell the truth, Daniel. Even if it costs you." Daniel swallowed. "It probably will." Jordan placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Then it's worth it." At Atlantic Sky's headquarters, employees braced themselves for the rollout of Project Horizon. Training modules began circulating, transparency dashboards teased. Some staff embraced the change, eager to prove themselves part of a new culture. Others resisted, muttering about surveillance and overreach. One pilot grumbled in a staff forum, "I signed up to fly planes, not to be scored on how I smile at passengers." Another replied, "Then maybe you signed up for the wrong job." The conversations were raw, messy, necessary, and all of them traced back to Jordan Ellis, the man who had forced a mirror in front of the airline, and, by extension, the nation. Late one evening, Jordan sat in his hotel room watching a panel discussion on television. One analyst dismissed him as a businessman exploiting victimhood. Another countered, "Or maybe he's the rare executive using his power to force accountability. And if that makes us uncomfortable, maybe that's the point." Jordan turned off the screen. He didn't need to hear strangers argue about his intentions. He knew his own truth. He hadn't chosen this path. But once on it, he would not turn back. Outside, planes cut through the night sky, their lights blinking against the dark. He wondered how many passengers sat inside, quietly enduring slights no one would ever record, insults that wouldn't go viral. Dignity chipped away piece by piece. That thought fueled him more than headlines ever could. The nation was watching, but Jordan wasn't fighting for the nation's gaze. He was fighting for the unseen, and he knew the storm was far from over. Daniel Price stared at the glowing screen in his dark apartment, fingers hovering above the keyboard. The op-ed draft blinked back at him, raw and unpolished. Every sentence carried risk. If he sent it to the paper, there would be no undoing it. For hours he paced the room, replaying the night on Flight 827. The look on Jordan's face when Claire Dawson said economy only. His own silence, heavy as lead. The weight of cowardice had followed him into every meeting, every interview, every news segment. At 2:17 a.m., he hit send. By sunrise, the headline spread across social media feeds. "I stayed silent when I should have spoken, an insider on the Flight 827 scandal." In the article, Daniel admitted everything. He described watching the exchange, the hesitation in his chest, the excuses he told himself, "Not my place, not worth the conflict. Maybe it'll blow over." He confessed that his silence had been a choice, one that protected his comfort while costing another man his dignity. And then he wrote the words that made readers stop scrolling. The truth is, bias doesn't survive because of the loudest voice in the room. It survives because of the quietest. The response was immediate and ferocious. Some hailed him as brave. Finally, someone from inside telling the truth. One commenter wrote, "Activist reposted his article, calling it a roadmap for accountability. Journalist requested interviews within hours. Others called him opportunistic. Too little, Too late. One headline sneered. A rival airline executive tweeted, "Confession is not courage. Speaking in the moment is." Inside Atlantic Sky, the fallout was seismic. Executives crowded into Victoria Lane's office. Voices raised. "He's throwing us under the bus," Alan Rivers snapped. "Now every employee with a grudge will run to the press," Ellen Park countered calmly. "Or maybe he's showing the honesty we've been lacking. Transparency earns trust." Victoria listened, arms folded, eyes sharp. Finally she said, "What Daniel did was dangerous, but it might also be necessary." Daniel, meanwhile, braced for the consequences. His phone buzzed nonstop. Some colleagues texted encouragement, others accused him of betrayal. His manager called with clipped words, "The board is furious. Don't expect this to blow over." He walked into the office later that morning knowing whispers would follow him down every hallway. Yet as he passed through the lobby, a young receptionist caught his arm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saying what so many of us think and never say." The words steadied him more than any headline. Jordan Ellis read the op-ed while sipping coffee in his hotel room. By the second paragraph, he set the cup down, hands trembling slightly. When he finished, he called Daniel. The younger man's voice cracked as he answered, "I'm sorry, Jordan. I should have." Jordan cut him off gently. "Daniel, you did now what you couldn't then, and that matters, but people are tearing me apart online," Daniel said. Jordan's tone softened. "Redemption isn't about applause. It's about honesty. You spoke the truth. Let the noise be noise." By evening, cable news ran segments dissecting Daniel's confession. Panels debated whether silence was complicity, whether apologies years late were worth anything. Civil rights leaders praised the piece, saying it highlighted the systemic issue of bystander inaction. For Claire Dawson, hiding in her suburban townhouse, the article landed like a verdict. Until then, she had clung to the story that it was all exaggerated, that her words had been misunderstood. Daniel's account left no room for denial. Her phone rang endlessly, reporters circling like hawks. She unplugged it and sat in the dark, replaying her words, her smirk, her certainty. For the first time, shame outweighed defiance. At Atlantic Sky headquarters, Victoria summoned Daniel to her office. The air was tense as he stepped inside. "You realize you've put this company in the crosshairs," she said coolly. "Yes," Daniel replied, "but it was already there. I just stopped pretending." Victoria studied him for a long moment, then leaned forward. "Do you believe in what we're trying to do here, Project Horizon, the cultural overhaul, all of it?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "I do. That's why I wrote it. Change won't stick if we bury the truth." A flicker of respect crossed her face. "Then you'd better be ready, because now you're the face of it, whether you like it or not." The next day, Daniel appeared on a primetime news show. Nervous but resolute, he repeated the line that had struck so many chords. Bias doesn't survive because of the loudest voice. It survives because of the quietest. Viewers leaned in. Some felt convicted, others defensive, but few could ignore it. Meanwhile, Jordan continued his own quiet push, meeting with regulators, consulting with activists, ensuring that Atlantic Sky's reforms went beyond window dressing. Together, the two men, one who endured the insult and one who admitted his silence, formed an unlikely alliance in the public eye. And while critics still circled, the tide of the conversation began to shift. The scandal was no longer just about a flight attendant's words. It was about the culture that allowed them to pass unchallenged and the courage it took to break that silence. Sontwa. Late one night, Maya found Jordan reviewing another stack of reports. She asked, "Do you think people will actually change, or is this just another storm that'll pass?" Jordan looked up, his expression steady. Storms pass, but they change the landscape. What matters is what we build afterward. She nodded, comforted by his certainty. Outside, lightning flashed faintly on the horizon, a reminder that the storm wasn't done yet. But inside, for the first time in weeks, Jordan felt something like hope. The first training session under Project Horizon began on a gray Monday morning at Atlantic Sky's New York Training Center. Rows of uniformed attendants, pursers, and supervisors filed into the auditorium, some whispering nervously, others crossing their arms with quiet defiance. On the stage, a slide projected the words, "Every passenger, every flight, every time." Victoria Lane opened the session herself, an unusual move for a CEO who rarely addressed frontline staff directly. What happened on Flight 827 was not just an incident. She began, her voice steady. It was a mirror. We didn't like what we saw, but we cannot change what we refuse to face. Starting today, we face it together. The room was tense. Some nodded. Others avoided her gaze. Then the facilitator, a former airline executive turned diversity consultant, stepped forward. She spoke not of policies, but of stories. Stories of passengers misjudged because of accent, skin color, or clothing. Stories of crew members who wanted to intervene but felt powerless. Each account hit like a small stone tossed into the silence, rippling outward. At one point, she asked, "What stops us from speaking up when we see bias?" The answers came slowly: fear of conflict, fear of retaliation, wanting to avoid awkwardness, thinking someone else would step in. Finally, a hand rose near the back. It was Maria Gonzalez, a flight attendant who had been on Flight 827. Her voice was soft but clear. "I tried in my own way. I offered Mr. Ellis extra kindness, but I didn't stop what was happening. I told myself it wasn't my place. I've thought about that every day since, and I don't want to feel that way again." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that signals something true has been spoken. Not everyone embraced the message. In employee lounges and online forums, resistance simmered. Some argued the reforms went too far, that they turned every interaction into a test, every smile into a metric. "I didn't sign up to be a social experiment," one attendant muttered, but others found relief in the clarity. A young purser posted anonymously, "For the first time, I know the company has my back if I speak up. That matters." Turnover numbers began to shift, slowly at first. Exit interviews revealed fewer complaints about toxic culture, more acknowledgement of the company's attempt to change. Still, the financial strain was undeniable. Alan Rivers presented charts to the board showing sharp drops in quarterly revenue, blaming boycotts and bad press. "We're bleeding cash," he warned. "Reforms won't matter if we can't survive the year." Ellen Park countered with customer satisfaction data. "Look at the long view. Complaints are down. Repeat bookings are ticking back up." Trust takes time, but it pays dividends. Victoria listened, weighing both realities. "We're not here to patch a hole," she finally said. "We're here to rebuild the ship. And sometimes rebuilding costs more than repairing." Meanwhile, Jordan Ellis kept his distance publicly, but monitored progress closely. Each week, Victoria's team sent him updates, revised training modules, new reporting protocols, cultural assessment surveys. He read them carefully, noting both the victories and the gaps. One night, Maya asked him, "Do you believe them? That they're really changing?" Jordan leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. I believe change is happening. Whether it lasts depends on what they do when no one's watching. Maya nodded. And people are definitely watching now. The pressure of scrutiny extended beyond staff. Passengers noticed. On social media, posts began to appear. Flew Atlantic sky last week. Crew treated me with more respect than I've had in years. Maybe things are changing. My flight was delayed, but the staff actually explained everything calmly. No attitude. Felt different. These small anecdotes gained traction, each one a counterweight to the viral video that had sparked the storm. For Jordan, the most powerful sign came in an email from an elderly black couple. They had flown Atlantic sky after years of avoiding it. The husband wrote, "For the first time, we felt like passengers, not problems. That's worth more than miles or points." Jordan read the note twice before forwarding it to Victoria. "Keep going," he typed simply. But the reforms also revealed uncomfortable truths. Anonymous observers, part of Project Horizon's accountability system, reported patterns of subtle bias persisting, crew members spending less time with certain demographics, gate agents scrutinizing boarding passes more closely for passengers of color. When these findings reached Victoria, she didn't bury them. She called another all-staff meeting. This will not vanish in a quarter. It may not vanish in a year, but we will not stop until bias is the exception, not the expectation. Some employees groaned privately, but others began to take ownership. During one flight, a young attendant named Jason Mendez noticed a colleague making disparaging remarks about a nervous immigrant passenger. This time, instead of looking away, he intervened. "We don't talk about our passengers like that," he said quietly but firmly. Later, he admitted to friends, 6 months ago, "I would have stayed silent, but not anymore." For Daniel Price, life had shifted dramatically since his op-ed. Strangers stopped him on the street to thank him, while critics blasted him online as disloyal. Inside Atlantic sky, he walked a fine line between hero and pariah. Victoria eventually called him back into her office. "You're a lightning rod," she said, "but lightning can illuminate as much as it burns. I want you on the training team." Daniel hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm the right person." She looked him in the eye. "You admitted your failure publicly. That honesty makes you the right person. People will listen because they know you've been where they are silent and ashamed." Reluctantly, he agreed, and when he stood before his first training class, recounting his silence on Flight 827, the room listened with rapt attention. His vulnerability carried weight policies never could. By the end of the quarter, Atlantic Sky's data showed measurable improvement, complaint rates down 38%, employee reports of feeling supported up 27%. Financials still lagged, but passenger trust, the hardest currency of all, was on the rise. In a board meeting, Alan Rivers grumbled, "Trust doesn't pay the bills." Jordan, joining via video, countered calmly, "Without trust, there are no bills to pay." The room fell silent. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. The ground was shifting slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Late one evening, Jordan walked through an airport terminal unnoticed, just another traveler among thousands. He watched an Atlantic Sky attendant help a nervous teenager traveling alone, her voice patient and kind. He saw a gate agent greet a family with warmth, their accents thick but their smiles wide. For the first time since Flight 827, Jordan felt something rare and powerful, hope not just in words or promises, but in ordinary moments. And he thought, maybe the ground really was shifting beneath their feet. 6 months after Flight 827 Atlantic, Sky announced a landmark event in New York City, A New Horizon, Atlantic Sky's commitment to every passenger. The company rented a grand hall near Bryant Park, filling it with banners that read, "Dignity in the Skies." Reporters packed the aisles, cameras flashed, and employees in crisp uniforms lined the walls. The company meant for this to be its public turning point, the day it proved the storm had forged something stronger. Jordan Ellis arrived quietly, escorted by Maya Brooks. He hadn't planned to attend, but Victoria Lane had called him personally. "We need you there," she'd said, not as a contract partner, but as a witness. "Our employees need to see who we are accountable to." He agreed, though not without hesitation. Public stages were dangerous places. Symbols could be praised 1 minute and scapegoated the next. When he entered, the crowd stirred. Some whispered, others applauded softly. He took his seat in the front row, eyes scanning the stage with measured calm. The program began with speeches from executives. Ellen Park outlined new metrics showing declines in complaints and increases in passenger trust. Daniel Price, now part of the training program, shared his personal story, the silence he regretted, the lessons he had learned. His words drew quiet nods from the audience. Then Victoria Lane stepped to the podium, her presence commanding. 6 months ago, she began, we failed, not only a passenger, but ourselves. That failure nearly cost us a $3.5 billion partnership, but it also forced us to change. She paused, letting the silence settle. Change is not easy. It is not perfect, but it is possible. And today, we commit before the world dignity is not optional at Atlantic Sky. It is our standard. Applause swelled through the hall. Cameras zoomed in. Flashes burst. The event seemed to be going exactly as scripted until the twist arrived. During the Q&A session, a hand shot up from the audience. A man in his 40s, dressed in a pilot's uniform, stood. His name tag read, Captain Lewis Hart. "My question is for Mr. Ellis," he said, voice clear. The crowd shifted, surprised. Jordan turned slightly, giving a small nod. "Go ahead." Captain Hart's tone carried a mix of defiance and fatigue. "You've been praised as the catalyst for all this, but some of us wonder, are we changing because it's right, or because you had the power to make it hurt? If you were just another passenger without influence, would Atlantic Sky care this much?" A hush swept over the room. The cameras swiveled toward Jordan. Maya's breath caught. Even Victoria leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Jordan stood slowly, steadying himself. He felt the weight of the moment. This was the test. He spoke evenly, his voice carrying to the back of the hall. "Captain, that's a fair question. The truth is, I did have power. I had the resources, the platform, the leverage. And yes, that made Atlantic Sky listen. But here's the thing." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "I wasn't the first passenger treated that way. I wasn't the only one. I was just the one who could hold up a mirror too big to ignore. What matters now isn't me. What matters is whether Atlantic Sky listens to the passengers who don't have power, the ones whose stories never make headlines." Murmurs rippled, softer this time. Thoughtful. Jordan continued, "If this company only changes for me, then we've failed. But if it changes for the grandmother traveling alone, for the immigrant family boarding nervously, for the teenager on their first flight, then this isn't about power anymore, it's about principle." Silence held for a moment. Then applause rose, not the polite kind, but deep, sustained. Some employees even stood. Captain Hart nodded slowly. Conceding? Fair answer. He sat back down, his defiance tempered by reflection. Afterward, as the event wound down, Victoria approached Jordan backstage. That could have gone badly. She admitted. Jordan offered a faint smile. The truth usually feels risky, but it's the only thing that sticks. Victoria exhaled, tension releasing from her shoulders. You've given us more than a partnership. Jordan, you've given us a standard we can't walk away from. He shook his head gently. You gave it to yourselves. I just happened to be on that flight. The press coverage the next day was electric. Headlines read, Atlantic Sky turns scandal into standard. Ellis challenges airline change for everyone, not just the powerful, from viral incident to corporate transformation. But beneath the headlines, conversations deepened. Employees debated the captain's question. Passengers shared new stories, both good and bad. Regulators took note, considering industry-wide changes. For Jordan, the event marked more than a turning point. It was proof that change wasn't about one man or one contract. It was about ordinary people deciding that silence was no longer acceptable, that dignity could be demanded and delivered. That night, walking through the quiet streets of New York with Maya, he felt lighter. The road ahead would still be long, the work unfinished. But for the first time, he believed the culture at Atlantic Sky had crossed a line it couldn't retreat from. And he thought, maybe this was what real victory looked like, not applause, not headlines, but the quiet knowledge that tomorrow's passengers might walk on board without bracing for disrespect. For days after the New York event, headlines glowed with cautious optimism. Atlantic Sky charts new path. One major paper wrote, social media buzzed with clips of Jordan Ellis's answer to Captain Hart, praised as a masterclass in dignity. Booking numbers began to rise again, slowly but steadily. Passengers reported improved experiences, and some who had sworn off Atlantic Sky publicly announced they were giving the airline another chance. For the first time in months, Victoria Lane allowed herself a long exhale. But victories, she knew, are fragile things. The fragility showed itself 2 weeks later. On a flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, a passenger named Samuel Carter, a black musician traveling for a concert, live-streamed his interaction with a gate agent. The agent had pulled him aside for random screening, but Carter's camera captured other passengers, all white, walking through, unbothered. Carter's voice was calm, but edged with weariness. Random seems to mean me. Every time. The clip spread fast, reigniting old wounds. So much for change, critics tweeted. Hashtags like "Tar and Still Sky Bias" began trending. By the time the plane landed in Los Angeles, the video had over 500,000 views. By midnight, it was on cable news. At Atlantic Sky headquarters, the crisis team assembled once again. The atmosphere was raw, more defensive this time. Alan Rivers slammed his folder on the table. We put millions into Horizon. We've bled cash. We staged a whole event, and now this. It proves nothing has changed. Ellen Park cut in sharply. No, Alan, it proves change takes longer than 6 months. You can't undo decades of culture with a press conference. Victoria sat at the head of the table, hands clasped, listening. Finally, she looked at Jordan, who had joined by video. What do you see? Jordan's eyes were steady. I see exactly what we should expect. Real change isn't a straight line. It's messy. It stumbles. The question isn't whether Atlantic Sky stumbles. The question is whether it gets back up. The silence that followed was heavy. Meanwhile, Carter himself became a reluctant figure in the storm. His live stream brought him both praise and harassment. In interviews, he said, I didn't mean to start anything. I just wanted people to see what we go through. What I go through. over and over. Jordan reached out privately, offering solidarity. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," he told him. "You owe yourself dignity. That's all." Carter replied, voice tired but grateful. "Feels like you've been carrying this weight longer than me. How do you do it?" Jordan paused before answering. "By remembering it's not mine alone. It belongs to all of us. That makes it heavy, but it also makes it worth carrying." Inside the company, reactions split again. Some employees felt demoralized. All that work, and the world still thinks we're racists. Others grew more determined, frustrated by colleagues who still resisted Horizon's reforms. Training sessions doubled down. Daniel Price spoke with unusual fire, confessing that even after his op-ed, he sometimes caught himself slipping back into silence. Change is not about what you do once. He told a group of attendants, "It's about what you do again and again, until it becomes who you are." The attendants listened, some leaning forward, some skeptical, but no one left the room unchanged. Victoria held another press conference, her tone firm but unyielding. "The incident with Mr. Carter reminds us that our work is not finished. We will not deny it. We will not excuse it. We will use it to push harder, because dignity delayed is dignity denied." The statement drew mixed reactions. Some applauded the honesty. Others mocked it as spin. The airline stock dipped again, though not as sharply as before. But Jordan noticed something different this time. The criticism felt less absolute, the trust less fragile. The ground that had shifted months ago seemed steadier now, able to bear the weight of another stumble. One evening, Maya asked him, "Doesn't it ever feel endless? Like no matter how much progress we make? Another story will prove we haven't gone far enough." Jordan looked out the window at the night sky, planes tracing their arcs across the darkness. "Of course it feels endless. That's because it is. Justice isn't a destination, it's a practice. You don't arrive at it. You keep walking toward it." She smiled faintly. "That sounds exhausting." He chuckled softly. "It is. But it's also the only road worth walking." In Los Angeles, Samuel Carter stood backstage at his concert, phone buzzing with messages. Some advised him to lawyer up. Others begged him to use his platform. He felt overwhelmed, caught between wanting peace and knowing silence wasn't enough. When he stepped onto the stage that night, guitar in hand, he paused before the first song. "This week, I was reminded that dignity isn't free. You have to claim it, and sometimes you have to show the world when it's denied." This song is for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. The audience erupted in cheers. His words, like Jordan's months earlier, turned pain into resonance. Back in Dallas, Victoria met with her executives late into the night. She ended the meeting with a line that echoed Jordan's. "We are not judged by whether we stumble," she said. "We are judged by whether we stand back up. And standing up is exactly what we're going to do." And so, once again, the company braced itself. The storm had returned, but this time, Atlantic Sky wasn't scrambling to survive. It was learning to endure. Samuel Carter's concert video, where he dedicated a song to passengers denied dignity, had racked up millions of views. Overnight, he became both a rising star and an unwilling advocate. Messages flooded his inbox, some thanking him, others demanding he do more. Exhausted, he agreed to meet Jordan Ellis in a quiet cafe in Los Angeles. The two men shook hands firmly, their shared weariness almost visible. "Feels like I'm standing where you stood 6 months ago," Carter said, voice low. Jordan nodded. "The spotlight can be blinding, but it can also light the path. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" Carter exhaled. "I just wanted to play music, not become a symbol." Jordan smiled faintly. None of us choose it, but once it chooses us, we can either resist it or use it. The choice is yours. The words hung between them, heavy but empowering. 2 weeks later, Atlantic Sky faced its test. On a red-eye flight from San Francisco to Atlanta, a dispute broke out in business class. A middle-aged white passenger complained loudly that his black seatmate didn't belong there. His voice carried down the aisle, sharp and entitled. Once upon a time, crew members might have ignored it, hoping it would fizzle. But this time, something different happened. Flight attendant Jason Mendez, the same young man who had once stopped a colleague from mocking a passenger, stepped forward. Calm, professional, but firm. He addressed the disruptive traveler. "Sir, all passengers in this cabin belong here. If you cannot treat your fellow travelers with respect, we will have to ask you to deplane." The man sputtered, threatened to call corporate, even pulled out his phone to record, but Mendez didn't flinch. He repeated his words, steady as stone, and this time, something else happened. Other crew members backed him up. The purser supported his decision. The captain was notified and approved it. When the passenger refused to calm down, airport security escorted him off the plane. The black traveler who had been targeted sat quietly, stunned. Mendez knelt beside him and said softly, "You deserve to be here. If you need anything, just let us know." The passenger nodded, eyes moist. "Thank you," he whispered. Another traveler caught the entire exchange on video. By the next morning, it was everywhere. But this time, the story was different. Headlines blared, "Atlantic Sky crew stands up for passenger. From scandal to standard airline, enforces dignity." 6 months after, economy only. A new kind of viral video. The clip showed not humiliation, but protection. Not silence, but courage. On social media, even critics admitted the change was real. One comment went viral. "This is what reform looks like. Not perfection, but progress." Victoria Lane called Jordan as soon as the story broke. For once, her voice carried relief. "Did you see it?" Jordan had. He smiled for the first time in weeks. "Yes." And so did the world. Maya, sitting beside him, added softly, "It's proof the training worked." Victoria's voice steadied. "It's proof we listened and acted." Meanwhile, Samuel Carter watched the clip from his phone, tears forming. He called Jordan late that night. "Man," Carter said, voice trembling. That was it. That was the moment. They actually stood up. Jordan's reply was quiet, but firm. That's how you know change is real. When no one is watching, but someone records it anyway. Carter chuckled through his emotion. "Guess maybe I'll keep the spotlight a little longer." In employee lounges, the video became a rallying point. For the first time, staff felt proud, not just of the uniform, but of what it represented. Mendez received messages of support from colleagues across the country. He wrote a short note to his team, "I just did what Horizon taught us, but I didn't do it alone. The crew stood with me. That's the difference." The note was shared across internal networks, printed out in break rooms, even taped to crew bulletin boards. It became a quiet mantra, "I didn't do it alone." Public trust began to solidify. Bookings climbed faster. Advocacy groups acknowledged the progress. Even skeptical politicians admitted Atlantic Sky had become a case study in corporate accountability. Alan Rivers, still wary, grudgingly admitted in a board meeting, "This time, the numbers are moving in our favor. Maybe trust really does translate to profit." Ellen Park shot him a look and said simply, "It always has. You just never measured it." Jordan, joining the meeting virtually, said nothing, but he smiled. That evening, Jordan sat on a balcony with Maya, reflecting on the journey. "Do you know what struck me most about that video?" he asked. Maya tilted her head. "What?" "That it wasn't about me, or you, or even Atlantic Sky. It was about ordinary people, in an ordinary moment, choosing dignity over silence." She nodded. "And maybe that's the only proof of change that matters." Jordan gazed at the night sky, planes drifting across the horizon like faint stars. For the first time since Flight 827, he felt not just hope, but peace, because change, real change, had finally taken flight. 6 months after Jason Mendez's decisive action on that red-eye flight, Atlantic Sky convened its annual leadership conference in New York City. The ballroom was filled with hundreds of managers, supervisors, and frontline employees, all gathered beneath banners that read, "Respect in every seat." Jordan Ellis had been invited as keynote speaker. At first, he hesitated. Part of him wanted to move on, to let the airline carry its own weight without leaning on his presence. But Maya Brooks had reminded him, sometimes people need to see the origin of the change to believe it's real. So he came. Victoria Lane introduced him warmly, her voice steady, not corporate polished, but human. "A year ago, we nearly lost everything, our reputation, our partnerships, and our trust with the public. But thanks to the courage of one man who chose accountability over silence, we stand here today renewed. Please welcome Mr. Jordan Ellis." Applause filled the room, respectful rather than raucous. Jordan stepped onto the stage in a dark suit, his posture calm, his eyes scanning the crowd. He began simply, "I'm not here as a CEO today. I'm here as a passenger. As a man who sat in a seat he paid for, yet was told he didn't belong. And as someone who chose not to walk away, but to ask for something better, not just for myself, but for everyone who would come after." The room grew silent, every word weighed carefully. "I've watched Atlantic Sky change," he continued, "not perfectly, not instantly, but steadily. And the real proof isn't in reports or metrics. It's in moments like a flight attendant standing up for a stranger at 2 a.m. when no one expected to be tested. That's when you know the culture has shifted." He paused, letting the words settle. Leadership is not about never failing. It's about what you do after failure. Do you cover it up, or do you confront it? Do you choose pride, or do you choose growth? Atlantic Sky chose growth, and that choice has created ripples far beyond this room. The applause this time was warmer, threaded with emotion. Later that afternoon, Jordan sat with Victoria, Alan Rivers, Ellen Park, and Daniel Price in a smaller boardroom. Samuel Carter, invited as a guest, joined via video link. His music had become an anthem for many of the airline's younger employees. Alan admitted something he'd never said before. "I fought these changes at first. I thought they were expensive distractions. But after seeing the numbers, after watching what happened with Mendez on that flight, I was wrong. This wasn't just moral. It was strategic." Victoria smiled wryly. Better late than never. "Alan." Jordan leaned forward. "It's not about being late. It's about being honest when you arrive." "That's what matters," Ellen added. "We're planning to embed this approach into every future initiative. Technical, operational, financial. Not just culture as an afterthought, but culture as a framework." Daniel nodded. "It's the only way to make sure what happened to Jordan never happens again. Not here, not anywhere." Samuel's voice came through the screen. And it's bigger than planes. You know, people are watching this model. If an airline can change, so can a bank, a hospital, a hotel. That's what excites me. Jordan smiled softly. That's exactly the point. The story isn't about me. It's about the possibility of transformation when accountability meets courage. That evening, Jordan and Maya took a quiet walk through Central Park. The city lights shimmered against the night sky. "You know," Maya said, "a year ago you were furious. You could have buried Atlantic Sky with one press conference." Jordan nodded. "I thought about it, and now you're helping shape their future. Doesn't that feel strange?" He stopped, looking out at the reflection of the skyline in the water. Strange, yes, but also right. Anger burns fast, but accountability that lasts. And if my choice helped make air travel more humane for even one person, then it was worth it. Maya smiled. More than one person. Jordan. Millions. Weeks later, Jordan boarded another Atlantic Sky flight, this time bound for Chicago. He had booked the seat quietly, with no announcement. For him, it was another test. From check-in to boarding, every interaction felt seamless, respectful, ordinary. The kind of ordinariness he had once longed for. Midway through the flight, a flight attendant named Alicia Williams approached him with a calm smile. "Mr. Ellis, I just wanted to thank you. I don't know all the details, but I know your story is why we were trained differently, why we're encouraged to speak up. It's made my job better. It's made me better." Jordan blinked, touched by the honesty. "Thank you, Alicia. That means more than you know." For the rest of the flight, he sat quietly by the window, watching the clouds drift below. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace in the sky. The ripple effects continued beyond aviation. Business schools studied the Atlantic Sky Standard, incorporating it into leadership courses. Dr. Daniel Price published a paper on the intersection of accountability, culture, and technology, citing Horizon Systems collaboration as a blueprint. Samuel Carter's ballad became a staple in diversity workshops, a reminder of how art can spark social change, and in churches, classrooms, and corporate boardrooms. Jordan's story was retold not as a tale of victimhood, but of transformation, a reminder that injustice confronted with dignity could become the seed of renewal. 1 year later, Jordan sat at his desk at Ellis Technologies, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. A framed note from Atlantic Sky's frontline employees sat on his shelf. It read, "We didn't do it alone. Thank you for showing us how to stand together." Maya entered, holding his schedule. "You're speaking at Columbia tomorrow, another lecture on accountability." Jordan chuckled. "Guess it never ends." "Change never does," Maya replied gently. Jordan leaned back, hands clasped. "Good. It shouldn't." He turned his gaze back to the skyline, the city alive with motion, its endless possibilities shimmering like stars. And in that moment, he understood the true legacy of Flight 827 wasn't just the reforms of one airline or the redemption of a brand. It was the reminder that courage, when paired with accountability, could ripple outward, touching lives unseen, reshaping cultures, and offering hope in places where silence once reigned. It was proof that even in the face of prejudice, transformation was possible, and that sometimes the most powerful journeys begin not with a choice to fight, but with the decision to stand with dignity. For Jordan Ellis, that was enough, more than enough. The story of Flight 827 isn't just about one CEO or one airline. It's about what happens when everyday prejudice is confronted with dignity instead of silence. for older generations who have lived through decades of social change. The lesson is both familiar and urgent progress doesn't come from ignoring injustice, but from choosing to act with integrity when it matters most. Jordan Ellis could have destroyed Atlantic Sky with one public statement. Instead, he chose accountability over revenge, pushing the company to reform its culture from the inside out. His restraint and moral courage remind us that true leadership is not measured by titles, but by the ability to transform pain into purpose. The takeaway for our own lives is clear when we face disrespect or witness it against others. We have a choice. We can stay silent, or we can speak up not with anger alone, but with clarity and conviction. Change begins in these small, ordinary moments. And if an airline can change, so can the communities we live in. Thank you for spending your time with us and for walking through this powerful journey. Stories like these remind us of the strength we all carry, the power to stand for dignity and change. If this touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep these conversations alive and build a world where everyone belongs.